Governments almost never default. They do something far quieter, and you always pay. Welcome to Wheelixon, where history isn't just remembered, it's used to understand how money, power, and systems quietly break. When most people hear the word default, they imagine collapse, banks closing, markets freezing, a government standing in front of cameras admitting failure. That image is dramatic. It is also misleading. Applied financial history shows something far more unsettling. Most governments never default openly. They default quietly, not by missing payments, but by changing the meaning of repayment itself. Because it doesn't look like default, people rarely recognize it while it's happening. Historically, default was obvious. A kingdom ran out of gold. An empire failed to pay soldiers. Creditors lost everything overnight. These events shattered trust instantly. Modern governments learned a brutal lesson from history. Open default ends political power. Quiet adjustment preserves it, so systems evolved. Today, when governments face debt levels, they cannot realistically repay through growth or taxation. They don't panic. They manage. And that management relies on 4 primary mechanisms. None are officially called default. All achieve the same result. The first mechanism is inflation. Inflation is the most elegant form of silent default ever created. Government debt is issued in fixed nominal terms. Inflation is not. When prices rise faster than interest rates, the real value of debt shrinks automatically. Payments are made, contracts are honored, no one can claim legal default. But creditors receive less purchasing power than they lent. The obligation is fulfilled, the value is not. This is not theoretical. After World War II, many advanced economies faced debt levels exceeding 100% of GDP. Defaulting openly would have destroyed credibility, so inflation did the work instead. The United States, the United Kingdom, and others allowed inflation to run higher than interest rates for years. Debt ratios fell. No default declared. But savers paid the price. The second mechanism is financial repression. The term sounds technical, but the idea is simple. Governments keep interest rates artificially low while inflation runs higher. Banks, pension funds, and institutions are encouraged, sometimes required, to hold government bonds. Capital is guided rather than forced. Savers earn less than inflation. The state borrows cheaply. The difference quietly transfers wealth from the public to the issuer. Applied financial history shows that financial repression almost always follows crises. It is framed as support, stability, recovery. But over time, repression becomes normal. Low yields stop being emergency measures. They become the baseline. People adapt, and the cost becomes invisible. The third mechanism is maturity extension. Instead of defaulting on existing debt, governments stretch repayment timelines. Short-term bonds become long-term bonds. Long-term bonds become ultra-long. Debt is pushed decades into the future. The burden doesn't disappear, it is postponed. This creates the appearance of sustainability without resolving the underlying imbalance. Politically, this is ideal. Current voters feel relief. Future voters inherit obligation. No one protests a problem they cannot yet feel. The fourth mechanism is currency devaluation. When governments borrow in their own currency, they control the unit of repayment. If that currency weakens, debt becomes easier to service in real terms. Foreign creditors lose value. Domestic prices rise. Again, no default announced, but value is destroyed. Together, these 4 mechanisms form the modern default toolkit. They are legal. They are normalized. They are rarely explained honestly, because explaining them invites resistance. This leads to a dangerous misconception. People believe, if there was a default, we would know. History shows, if there was a default, it would feel normal. Modern default does not arrive as a crisis. It arrives as erosion. Life slowly becomes more expensive. Savings buy less. Opportunities narrow, but no single moment triggers revolt. That is by design. Applied financial history teaches that default is no longer an event. It is a process, slow enough to avoid panic, broad enough to distribute blame, quiet enough to preserve authority. This explains why debt headlines often feel disconnected from reality. Governments announce rising debt, yet insist everything is under control. And technically they are right. The system is functioning. Payments are made. But functioning does not mean fair. The cost of silent default is not evenly distributed. Those with assets adapt. Those without fall behind. Borrowers benefit. Savers lose. Time becomes an ally to debtors and an enemy to those who rely on money holding value. This is why people feel confused. They hear, there is no default. The debt is manageable. The system is stable. Yet their lived experience tells a different story. That gap is not imaginary, it is structural. Governments do not choose this path because they are malicious. They choose it because alternatives are worse. Raising taxes openly triggers backlash. Cutting spending creates instability. Default destroys credibility, silent default spreads pain slowly, and slow pain is politically survivable. So this is why financial history repeats. From ancient empires to modern states, the logic remains the same. When truth becomes too costly, dilution becomes attractive. The danger is not that governments reduce debt quietly. The danger is that people do not recognize it. Because recognition changes behavior. People save differently, invest differently, trust institutions differently. Once trust erodes, systems become fragile. Not because debt exists, but because legitimacy weakens. Applied financial history does not argue that collapse is inevitable. It argues that cost is unavoidable. Debt is never erased. It is reassigned. This changes how you should read economic headlines. You stop asking, will there be a default? You start asking, who is paying right now? That question always has an answer. Modern default does not wear a warning label. It wears the language of stability, and that is why it works. Understanding this does not require panic. It requires clarity. Clarity about incentives, clarity about mechanisms, clarity about history. Because governments almost never default the way people expect. They default in ways that feel normal, until one day people realize they already paid. If you want to understand money beyond headlines, subscribe to Wheelixen.